T minus 20.
Very much, guys, for attending our very first major event. So probably I'll start with some, give you some background about OneQuantum Philippines. Well, OneQuantum Philippines actually started way back in 2017. And we were actually struggling to penetrate into the what you call this, the awareness of the Filipinos. And fortunately, we were noticed by OneQuantum Global, and they we were so we now are OneQuantum Global, and we were now part of OneQuantum Global, and in the Philippines, we have a mission, which is to increase awareness of quantum technologies, and hopefully that will make Philippines a quantum-enabled country. Yeah, so we want to make it accessible also as much as possible. And, quantum technology is actually, it's not an easy subject, because if it were easy, then every one of us would know about it. We want to influence education in the Philippines to, as much as possible, as early as possible, introduce quantum concepts to the kids, because they are the future, and the more they hear about these things, and when they grow up, it will just be very natural for them. Yeah. So so thank you very much, and let me introduce to you our speaker. We are very fortunate to have him. His name is John Barnes. So let me just read his bio. So John is a recruiter. He's a headhunter, community builder. He's the founder of Entangled Positions, which he started in 2014. He is also the president of OneQuantum UK and Europe. He is a special advisor for workforce and talent to the Quantum Institute, Quantum Strategy Institute, which is a think tank striving to unlock the use cases, mysteries, and potential of quantum technologies. And he is a host of a podcast called Entangled Discussions. So, ladies and gentlemen, please welcome John Barnes.
Thank you, Bobby.
Over to you, John.
Thank you, Bobby. And it's great to be here as Quantum 2 reaches out to all corners of the world. And as Bobby mentioned, one of the key things is making quantum accessible. So I think that one good mantra to remember is that as OneQuantum, we don't select, we accept. And if you want to get involved in quantum, get involved in quantum. And hopefully today's talk will give some ideas, spark some thoughts off, and really either further people's journey into quantum, or indeed begin that journey. So before we start on the main talk, one of the things that's really important is that we focus on the topics that are most of interest to you watching in the audience. So I'll give an overview of the general ecosystem, but I'm looking forward to lots of questions in the chat so we can make this conversation as relevant as possible to everyone. So to introduce the talk, as we progress along the second quantum revolution, many of the most discussed challenges are those around staffing, workforce, talent, and hiring. So today's talk is designed to inform, demystify, and empower you to help make the right decisions to improve both your life and the lives of others. So to begin with, to help predict what the future might hold, it's also important to understand the past and present, particularly in what is such a rapidly evolving landscape. So whilst a lot of what's happening in quantum today is driven by physics and maths, people are a messy, complex biological system that work in different ways to these sort of clean, clinical maths and physics principles. So what we need to look at is how we can use these tools, understand the drivers behind current and future trends. So not just work, but societal history has been driven by technology for thousands of years with countless examples. But a couple of famous examples would be such as the invention of the spinning jenny during the first industrial revolution, and the reaction of the Luddites who were smashing the machines they felt had made them redundant. A second example would be Henry Ford creating mass-produced cars that required very few metal workers. And this again changed the landscape of work. And whilst these events seem a very long time ago and in a different age, the fundamental design of people hasn't changed. So there's direct lessons in how huge leaps forward in technology can change what work entails. And we're going through that at the present time. So if we then move forward nearly a century to 2004, this is where I can really begin to give firsthand witness to technology and recruitment within technology. And then from 2014, we can then look at having firsthand seats of quantum recruitment. And during these last 8 years, there's been incredible shifts in the dynamics of the ecosystem. And obviously this filters down to the requirements for staffing, talent, hire and workforce. So in 2014, apart from a couple of notable exceptions, the industry, if it could be called that, was populated by university spin-outs, core science projects, and the requirement that of people that these organizations had was mainly theoretical or experimental physicists, alongside a few coders and developers. And there's still a very strong demand for these skills. If we skip forward a few years, then there was more of the focus for business technology hybrid workers started to develop. Often this was driven by a view that it was both easier and more productive to take a good scientist or technologist with certain personality traits and teach them business skills. That was, a lot of people felt that was easier than to teach business people complex science, and it gave them an advantage when engaging with the wider scientific community. And over the last 5 years, again, this is an area that's continued to grow more and more rapidly. 2020 was quite a unusual year for the human population as a whole. But it was also the start of a big shift in the quantum industry as well. So this was due to a combination of the technology maturing, pandemic enforced changes in the way we communicate, and the way we communicated led to an increase in interaction. And alongside this, there was financial stimulus, both public and private. And what, in terms of the workforce, what happened then is there was a growth in requirement for a number of other skills, and there was an increasingly broad range of skills. And as companies began to grow up as businesses, so they were seeking web developers, HR professionals, marketing, business, user experience, finance, and all of the other roles that a successful business requires, irrespective of its sector. So this was also around the time that other quantum-focused recruiters started to enter the space as well. And given that specialist recruiters focus on markets with a combination of revenue and candidate shortage, this clearly demonstrates how quantum was perceived by the wider business community. And then over the last 2 years, things certainly haven't slowed down. If anything, they've increased in pace. So the number of people with relevant skills is growing increasingly rapidly, albeit the requirement for such skills grows ever more quickly. So allied to this, the businesses are ever more focused on the need to hit funding stage benchmarks or work towards obtaining revenue through their products and services. So the business focused roles that we mentioned are growing ever increasingly rapidly. Engineering challenges are becoming more prominent and being given more thought. And as with many things in quantum, integration is really key to the success. So there is a silver lining here, though. So there's a rapidly increasing flow of bright, talented, energetic people wanting to enter into quantum, and I'm hoping that's why the people joining us today have joined. And that whilst there's so much talk in the industry about a talent shortage, we don't see this as being entirely accurate. The potential talent pool is wide and deep. And one thing that is certainly accurate is that there's a skills gap that needs to be addressed if quantum 2 is to flourish at the hoped for rate. And OneQuantum is a body that really cares about this and is looking to help people develop those skills and integrate with the wider global community. So that's a little bit of a sort of a tour of the history of what's got us to here. And within that, there's drivers and evolution to this. So with this skills gap we mentioned, when combined with integrating quantum and classic traditional industries, it gives huge challenges to the global community of economic unions, governments, nations, academia, commercial and public organizations, educators, trainers, supporting bodies and individuals. And with these challenges come lots of opportunities and huge rewards for those who get it right. So education, integration, and transfer and development of skills are crucial as the quantum ecosystem integrates with traditional ecosystems. And if we can combine the best of quantum with the best of classic, that's where the magic will really happen. So given the importance of the myriad of quantum technologies, and I appreciate today we're talking about quantum computing, but quantum computing isn't the only technology in quantum. There's also sensing, quantum key distribution, and a whole myriad of other technologies that rightly or wrongly maybe don't get quite as much attention. And there's rightly excitement at the potential of delivering robust, useful applications that harness the fundamental properties of nature. But in the words of Voltaire, or Spider-Man if you prefer, with great power comes great responsibility. So we need as many bright, inventive, energetic, brilliant minds as possible. And across the world, there's a vast number of people that have these things. So we can look at how we offer the opportunity to integrate these different stakeholders, whether this is nation to nation, software to hardware, and engineering, employer to employee, government, academia, and industry, classic and quantum, and all of the other areas that, when combining, offer so much more than they can do individually. So training and education, communication, storytelling, innovative thought leadership, these are all key components of what we need if we're going to really harness the benefit of quantum technologies. So with this, there's a responsibility of individual people, organizations, and working together to understand what the goals are and plot the correct way to get there. So for many, this means appreciating that the technology is a crucial part of the business, but that it is part of a wider project needing to be delivered, not a standalone ecosystem. So who are the people and the skills required in a market that's so competitive, and how do you ensure these people get the opportunities that they need to really flourish? And as a business, both with Entangled Positions and OneQuantum, and more recently the Quantum Strategy Institute, we've spent many years combined planning for this stage, and looking at what we expect to happen years in advance. And this isn't a luxury that most have, but it's never too soon to start planning for the future. So a few examples of that could be, joining communities within areas that you're interested in. And today's a great, either a great further step or a great first step. And it could be that you're a software developer. Well, join communities of other developers that are looking at quantum applications. It could be you've got an interest in hardware. It might be the business side of things that most interest you. Well, there will be ways of integrating with that community. And at Entangled Positions, we've created many such groups on LinkedIn, and we've also, as OneQuantum, we create global networks so that no one has to stand alone. So as we progress along the second quantum revolution, a lot of the challenges. Oh, sorry, I've just lost my train slightly. Yes, and within these groups and this integration, commercialization and productization is huge drivers, and they come with huge rewards. And this is an area that the people watching today can be a part of. So biological systems. So when using terms like talent, workforce, and skills, and identifying the solutions to these shortfalls, there's a tendency by many to reduce this to data. And this is a powerful tool, but it relies on sufficient numbers of cohesive data points, and they're not always in the public domain. A lot of presentations of data are more for marketing than actually for the ecosystem. And whilst they're valuable, this does need to be taken into account. Where there is data but using few, so where there is information using few data points, a few outliers can skew the results. So just for example, in the last year, we've placed people into what would be termed sales and marketing roles with salaries ranging from $50,000 to $500,000. So you can see how quickly that can skew results. These will even themselves out, but obviously the more people that are involved in quantum, the more that will happen. So again, there's a responsibility on you guys to get involved and help us iron some of this out. There's also an even older factor as well, and this is referenced by an old piece of recruitment wisdom. And this is that as a recruiter, we have the only product that can say no to being sold. Now, that's a slightly lazy and old-fashioned term, but the importance of this is that people are biological systems and don't react to given stimuli in the same way. So last year, the White House reported on these matters, and it gave some good common sense advice regarding training, education, attraction, and retention, which are all important. But it failed to highlight the difficulty of those in the US companies in the US to access global talent, or people outside of the US to work for the organization in the US that are doing great work. And this isn't unique to the States. Each country has a slightly different challenge around this. And we work in a global talent market. So this does give opportunities for people to work globally, relocate to other countries, or even work remotely. And an even bigger oversight was that there was a preeminence on focusing on salary, which, whilst it's important, isn't the biggest motivation for most of the people that we speak to day in, day out. So aspirations vary hugely across individuals and organizations. And for those that understand that, they can have a huge advantage in the current and near-term market. So I would always say, when it comes to looking for a role or a career, the first stage should be working out what you're interested in. Because if you know what you want to do and where you want to go, you can then start plotting a journey to that. If you don't know what you're interested in, it's much harder to do that. And within quantum technologies, there's going to be, whether now or in future, there's going to be opportunities to work with all of the different things people are interested in. This is the physics that underpins the universe. So it will have application. You might want to solve problems around global warming. Well, that's already started, but it will come more. You might want to work on biodiversity. You might want to feed the world. You might want to just make lots of money. all of these things have potential within the quantum ecosystem for you to aspire to these things. And one of the challenges as well is sort of Bobby alluded to this earlier, that when working with quantum, it's not intuitive. So what happens when you think classically in a quantum world? So given that people aren't binary systems that fit easily into a pre-designated box, it's important to think outside of this box. And here's a few examples to help recognize that. So as I mentioned, understanding what you want is important, because that's the trigger for your journey. And if you get that right, you have the opportunity to work in something that you find value, is rewarding, and you'll produce far better work, which is important for you and those around you. So if you can channel that into if you can channel your aspirations with your career, you'll lead a happier life and be able to influence more positivity around you. And for an organization that's able to harness that, the benefits are also there, that you'll be a more productive worker and likely to stay a lot longer as well. So these are really win-win situations. So alongside that, look past things that are arbitrary and predefined criteria. If you're looking for work and you're looking at a job description, for example, usually you won't need to match 100% of the job spec. So don't be afraid to try. What's the worst that can happen? You don't get the role, but you've not lost anything by trying. But the upside of that is you might just get the perfect position. So apply for things, look at things and try and be ambitious with this. And this is matched by employers. We coach a lot of organizations that they need to look at what's essential to start the role, and then we'll look at what can be developed by training and development processes internally. And this is particularly true when looking at business technology hybrids that I mentioned earlier. And I think that the final words on this would be something that rightly inspires a great deal of passion, and harnessing diverse skills, experiences, and backgrounds, and channels that culture across the global community to become greater than its individual component parts. And in the words of our CQO, at Entangled Positions, and also OneQuantum member, Rupesh Srivastava, quantum doesn't discriminate, so neither should we. This is the fundamental building blocks of the universe, and it happens irrespective of your prejudice and insights. So if we can come together as a global community, that's where the real magic happens, and it's a massive piece of work that we're looking to undertake. So the more people we can get involved, the more skills, the more ideas, the brighter that future is going to be. So I'd love to field any questions that people have, so we can make this as interactive and as relevant to those watching.
Yes, John. So we already have a few questions here. So first is from Bernie. He's also a member of OneQuantum Philippines. His question is, do we need to chart a path to quantum computing so that we can structure the content to attain the skills, like building blocks or subcomponents towards it?
Yeah, so I think with these with the sort of future developments, it's really important that we take a short, medium, and long-term view of these things, and we structure what the growth potential might be. And there's an interesting balance here, that we want to create lots of interest and excitement, but we have to do it in a way that's responsible and doesn't feed into hype cycles. Because if you overpromise things and certain deliverables aren't hit, then the people become disenchanted by that, and you can see that there's potential for what's called a quantum winter if we create too much hype. So it's important to get that responsible roadmap in place with the right deliverables. But also we need to understand that these are things that have never occurred before. These are difficult challenges. So we have to be aware that what we plan may not be 100% accurate. But and just to take that a step further, to give some examples, so we talk about qubits, quantum bits. Now, even within so, and we talk about qubits as a fairly standard term, but at the moment, groups like NIST, IEEE, they're looking at standardization, and one of the things that's really tricky is even just working out what something as seemingly simple as what is a qubit. And with all of the different systems, whether it's annealing, photonics, superconducting, MV diamond, and all of these other different potential ways of creating qubits, even within those separate areas, one qubit's not the same as another qubit. And then you start looking at different qubit technologies. So it's really important, but it's also really difficult.
Oh, thank you, John. So I hope that answers your question, Burns. There's another question from Andrew O'Connor. So his question is, does OneQuantum have programs to address the skills gap? Do they have boot camps or trainings that Filipinos can join?
Yeah, so OneQuantum does have mentorship programs. If you go on the OneQuantum website, there are mentorship programs, and what that does, it works with people that are have expertise within quantum, and there's a mentor and a mentee system. So I think last year there was around 2,000 people that went through, and don't quote me on the number, I do apologize, but I think it was 2,000 people that went through the mentorship program last year. And this is an expanding project as well. So that's one great way of getting involved. Alongside that as well, there's certain projects that that people undertake. So the Nepalese chapter, for example, have created a proof of concept where they're using quantum technologies to fight against human trafficking in the Himalayas. OneQuantum Africa are looking at, they've recently started a project looking at identifying water sources. So there's the mentorship program, but there's also projects that people can get involved with. And this doesn't always take expertise in quantum. There might be classic developers that can help getting involved. It might be that someone's a good storyteller and a narrator that can get the message out. It might be that someone's a good networker and can bring more people into introduce more people. So and as I mentioned before, if you want to get involved with quantum, and OneQuantum's a great vehicle to do so.
Thank you, John. So we have another question from Burns. Do we need to pump up modern physics concepts to schools and even undergraduate physics courses?
Yes, I think education is one of, education is the skill that enables all other skills. So the more we can, first of all, the more people we can bring into the quantum ecosystem, the better. But one of the things I think that's really exciting is there's a lot of thought happening around high school education in quantum. But actually, I think if we take it a little bit further, if you look at young children, sort of preschool even. So one of the issues with quantum is that people find challenging is it's not intuitive. As humans, we've evolved in a way that kept us alive. If we were on the plains as when people first stood up, if you were thinking about atoms and things like that, you probably would have been eaten by a lion or fell down a hole or something, like, in a poisonous berry or whatever else it would have been. So there wasn't an evolutionary pressure on considering quantum. We have more troubling things to worry about to stay alive. But this means that we don't see the world as it is. We experience it in a different way because that's what our evolution's led to. And also we're products of our environment. So we're told that, that things can't be in two places at once. We're told that, that something that we touch is solid because that's how we experience it. But when you look at the physics of the subatomic level, that's not really how things work. So if you take a young child, if you looked at things like superposition and entanglement, well, actually, that's just make believe to a young child. These are the concepts that they're actually working with their fairy tales and things like that. So if you educate a young enough age, they're not sort of trained away from thinking that to be trained back into thinking that. So you may have a situation where people grow up in the quantum age and it's far more intuitive as a quantum native or a quantum citizen or whatever you want to call it, where you've actually been brought up in a world where quantum is normal rather than a world where it wasn't, and then having to relearn or unlearn the things that you think are happening. So yeah, I think education is crucially important, and we can never have enough of it, but to strive to get as much as possible is absolutely a critical goal.
There's a question from Marge. So she's 17 years old, and she's very interested in learning advanced things. So her question is AI applied here as well?
Yes, I think so. If you look over the last 10, 20 years or so, we've seen some staggering developments with artificial intelligence, machine learning, neural networks, deep learning, and all the other data-driven topics that are performing incredible real-world applications. And actually, I mentioned quantum winter earlier. We can see similarities where AI got overhyped, and then it hits like an AI winter, and it had to emerge from that. So there's lessons to be learned. But I think alongside that, if you look at something like AI or machine learning, where it's data driven, by harnessing the potential powers of quantum computing and working AI or machine learning with quantum processors, the potential to use that data for these techniques to become even more powerful is staggering. And I think that we have some ideas of what it may entail, but I think a lot of the potential applications we can't even envisage yet. So 100%, I think that AI, AI and quantum coming together offer real incredible possibilities. I would also say as well, so one thing I would say, as a 17-year-old, there's a group called Qmunity, which is Q-Munity, and it's run by Anisha Musti. As a young person looking, or as a person looking to get into the next generation of quantum, I'd highly recommend looking at Qmunity and the great work they're doing, both in terms of training, development, translation, and all sorts of different avenues. And they're a group that I personally work quite closely with, and also have strong ties to OneQuantum as well.
We have a question again from Burns. So many can shy away from quantum mechanics, hard concepts, and mathematics and modern physics. How can we make more of that palatable to students?
So just so that I understand the question correctly, so it's how do the complex quantum mechanics and the maths surrounding it
make it more palatable to students?
Well, I think I mean the first thing I would say is these things are hard. So some people want to do things because they're hard, others not so much. I think we have to bear that in mind. But I do think there are certain challenges on this as well, and rewards. So for some people, and people learn in different ways. People have different styles of learning. So for example, I'm not a scientist, I'm not a mathematician, I'm not a physicist. So my understanding and how I process different quantum phenomena is more of an intuitive level rather than the heavy math side of things. Nobody lets me play with lasers or write algorithms, and it's much better that way. It's safer. But I think that having a lot of education systems, quantum is kind of just tagged on the end as one lesson, and it's an interesting side topic rather than the main thrust of physics or mathematics. And that's something that I think we would do well to evolve. But also alongside that, there's certain books and projects and topics coming out at the moment that try and make these things more accessible. there's science books that don't have equations in it, don't have a heavy amount of maths in it. And actually these things make it more accessible. So when I first started working in quantum in 2014, there was a huge gap between the kind of the peer-reviewed white papers up here, and then there was some media articles that were almost entirely wrong. But gradually over the years, we saw more development of programs like Horizon and scientists discussing things in a way that was accessible to lay people. And I think that developing these things is really important. And actually coming back to what I said about teaching young children some of the fundamentals of quantum, that should then lead on to a situation where for some people it will become not just easier to understand, but more exciting, and we can harness those applications. And I think alongside that, there's a lot of good work being done on reaching out to wider populations and showing that how that could work. So, and within quantum, not everyone is going to need to be a particle physicist or a mathematician. There's going to be opportunities for all different sorts of functions and roles. So finding what's of interest to you is important. Some of the maths is going to be hard. That we can't get away from that. And if it was easy, we would have done it already. But there's also lots of different roles that are required and lots of different functions that come to play. And by fusing these different skills and experiences and integrating that together, that's where the real magic's going to happen. But I think there should be this should be explained to school children and actually adults as well. This isn't something, the potential benefit may be greater for school children, but we shouldn't limit ourselves to that either.
Thank you, John. So here's a question from Sai. So the question is, excluding AI, ML, does quantum computing have any effect on data analytics field?
So if you look at the advantages that quantum computing promise, so if you take it down to a fundamental level and looking at qubits, so if you have I'd make a differentiation here between a qubit and a logical qubit. So and if I just unpack that a little bit, so a logical qubit is a qubit that works perfectly. At the moment, we have to have lots of qubits to create a logical qubit. We probably don't have a system that has a logical qubit yet. But if you take a logical qubit that can be in 0, 1, or a superposition in between, then as you add every qubit, you double the a logical qubit, sorry, you double the processing power. Once you get to about 300 qubits, that has the same number of variables as there are atoms in the universe. So if you take a traditional semiconductor that requires an atom, we couldn't, if we used every atom in the universe, once we hit 300 logical qubits, the classic systems would run out of steam. And then if you had 301 qubits, you would then have twice as many possible variations as there are atoms in the universe, and so on. So within that, the potential for data analysis is staggering, because if you look at sequencing chemicals, there's some chemicals chemicals we can do fairly easily. Once you start get to slightly medium complex chemicals, there's not enough processing power in a classic system to be able to do that but in the universe that we're in. So if you apply the benefits of quantum, I think data is one of the areas that can really be revolutionized. And I think, chemical discoveries is a great example. Also mapping weather systems, the potential to map weather systems centuries into the future. If you look at delivery routes, the delivery drivers route problem is one that we're seeing real world benefits, because each different possible location for delivery, it very quickly scales the complexity of that. So this is also another area that I think We're seeing real world examples that will continue to flourish. The banking industry as well, that takes a lot of data on the trading side, for example. These are areas that have really good potential to be evolved. Looking at material science, these are other areas, and there's a whole myriad of other things that probably haven't been considered en masse. And this is important as well. This brings on to another thing. So if you've got a quantum organization that's speaking with a classic organization, the classic organization may not know what the quantum computer might be able to do. The quantum computing company may not know about what the other business requires. So when they work together, the use cases that can be brought forward are really exciting, because the quantum computing company finds out what the potential is, the classic company finds out what the potential is, and they can work together on providing a solution.
Thank you, John. You actually answered the question that I have in mind, which is what problems are people solving via quantum computing? I have a question. So based on the candidates that you have screened, let's just focus this to quantum computing. Okay. What's the minimum requirement to be in quantum computing?
How long's a piece of string? So with that, and this is something we get asked a lot, and I didn't mean to be flippant with the answer, but it is a little bit of that case. So
yeah,
the thing, if you think about it within a business, the reason you hire is for someone, you need extra capacity and someone to perform a specific role. Now, when you're looking at a role within quantum computing, what role is that? Are you working on the are you working as a hardcore coder? Are you working on the integration piece? Are you the HR? Are you the person doing HR or the office manager? In which case, the levels required are very different. I think some of the things that we see a lot of are working with things like Python, C++ on the classic side. Then there's the quantum language, so to simulate quantum systems, or the languages that underpin some of the quantum languages. Then you also have Qiskit, Penny Lane, and all of the other quantum languages, brackets and the like. But the role that you work on is really what defines that. And even within that, each organization will have a slightly different requirement. So it's one of those questions that's very difficult to give a specific answer, because there isn't really a set answer. And the other thing to bear in mind is these things change rapidly. So if we go back a couple of years, the roles we used to see are markedly different to what they are now. If you go back 8 years, they're incredibly different. We still see those roles, but there's all sorts of other things happening. So I would come back to the, what's of interest to you. If you work out what you want to do and what's of interest, then you can map the skills you need to gain to get into those positions. But yeah, in terms of what's required, it really depends on the function, the role, what you're looking to do, and what the company wants, even down to who the hiring manager is. It might be that you catch someone that you interview with, you really resonate, and you're given an opportunity that maybe you wouldn't have if there wasn't that personality side of things. So I've tried not to dodge the question there, but there isn't really a set answer for that one.
Okay, let me make it more specific. Let's say quantum computing, programming a quantum computer. Okay, so you don't need hardware for that, right? So based on the candidates that that might have this work already, do you need a PhD to become a quantum programmer?
Yeah. So for several years, we only had requirements for PhDs with maybe some masters there, or people that have been in high performance computing for 20 years, or these sorts of very high end skills. But we're now placing people with bachelors. We've even on so we work with control systems teams, for example. And if you take a classic software developer, and I spent 10 years recruiting classic software developers even before I touched quantum. And in that environment, your commercial experience far outweighs your academic experience. No one's looking for a developer that's been doing, working on Java or .NET or C++ for 5 or 10 years. Nobody's worried about their academics. They're worried about what they can actually do. Quantum's slightly different because it's still quite an academic piece of work. And the people within quantum tend to be, a lot of people are academics, so they see things from that mindset. So we are seeing this change. But for example, with some of the control systems teams we work, actually a good developer without the academics is often more desirable than someone coming straight from academia with a master's or a PhD. So it's evolved that most of what we see is still for academics. However, that is changing, and albeit that the non or either non-academics or undergrads are they're starting from a smaller base, but I would say that that's growing more quickly percentage wise than the requirements for PhDs. I think that will continue to happen because there's only so many people getting PhDs per year, so it's not sustainable. And there's not, although that's ever increasing, it's not enough as we speak. So that's not a sustainable model if people continue to do that.
Yeah. So we have another question here from Sai. So to work on quantum computing, does knowing domain knowledge important?
Yeah, well, I think with anything, that the more specific experience you can bring, it's always going to be an advantage. But within quantum as well, as I say, things are growing so quickly. So I think there's an onus on organizations that are hiring to look at not just having this ideal wish list of things that's going to be very difficult to find, but actually look at what's required. So, what does an organization need for someone to start, for someone to start in the role, and then what can be trained in-house. So and there's a lot of there's going to be a big requirement for repurposing skills, upskilling people, training development, and that needs to come not just from academia, but from trainers and educators that are non-academic, but also from organizations as well. So I think, yeah, domain knowledge is important, but there are other things that can be implemented and repurposed, and that's really where a lot of value is going to come. And we're going along that process at the moment, but we're not. I'm not satisfied that we've done quite enough of that just yet. But there's a lot of good thought and good people working on that. So yes, domain knowledge is important, but there are other things as well that can be allied to that. And alongside that, by bringing people that aren't in that same bubble to the equation, you avoid potentially some of the biases that go with it. You create a more diverse talent, a group of talents and people, and that leads to higher performing teams, higher performing organizations. So that's something that's really, really important for the organizations and individuals that are going to succeed.
Thank you, John. So we have another question here from Burns. What's the typical paycheck for a quantum professional? Starter, mid experienced, and senior experience?
Where?
That's a good question. Let's start with the UK.
Yeah. So the reason I ask it is so we work a lot with candidates relocating around the world. So put aside for one moment what you mean by each of those roles, because they're not generic. Put aside which organization you're going to work for, but even within the UK, if you go from, say, London to Cardiff, which is just a couple of 100 miles down one road, the salaries are roughly half in Cardiff what they are in London. So whenever we work with candidates, we don't just we ask what the salary requirement would be in the area they're familiar with, and then we can cross-reference that with the cost of living and get a rough approximation. So different locations have different costs of living. There's also cultural differences. So if you take the US culture compared to European culture, in the US, the salaries tend to be higher, the benefits tend to be less, there's less holiday, and so it's very difficult to give that approximation. I can look at sort of certain cities and certain skill sets and give you an approximation, but there's reports on this sort of thing, and they're very unreliable because there's not enough data points. So generally speaking, if you took a PhD and averaged it out across the states, if you're looking around $100,000 per year for a PhD just entering, that's probably about right. But obviously, if you go to San Francisco, for example, it's significantly higher, albeit often the real term would be lower because by the time you factor in cost of living. So it's a really difficult question to answer without more information. I'd need more info to be able to answer that properly. So and I'm happy if you want to come back on that.
Okay. So another question here also from Burns. Is there a serious direction of quantum computing for quantum biology development?
Yes, I think quantum biology is really interesting, actually. It was one of the things when I first started looking at quantum and learning about it was quantum biology. So obviously, without quantum biology, there is no life on Earth because photosynthesis doesn't happen. There's no quantum tunneling. We don't exist. And then looking at birds that have quantum phenomena in their eye when they travel to the warmer climes and then back when they migrate. So this is something I think that's really interesting. The challenge with biology is that biological systems are complex. In physics, you can generally shut off different systems to get the experiment you want on just one thing. In biology, if you're experimenting on a person, you can't just turn off all of the systems to work. Turn off. We'll turn off the blood, turn off the nerves, turn off this, turn off that, because I want to find out how quickly your toenails grow. It's not very ethical. You might get challenged on that, and I think quantum biology is really fascinating, and it's a hard challenge as well. So I think there's certain things happening at the moment with that are quite interesting. I think as we move out of the NISQ era, so the noisy intermediate scale quantum, and we move into more robust systems, I think that biology gives real opportunity for some of the most fascinating developments that quantum computing has to offer.
Okay, that's good. So let me see if there's another question. Yeah, so I think that's it. I have one last question. So for the UK, what's UK's view on quantum computing?
Yeah, so interestingly, actually, so we speak quite a lot with government bodies and their representatives. And so I was talking recently at the Economist Commercializing Quantum event, and George Freeman, who's the Minister for Science in the UK, was also talking. And one of the interesting, there was lots of interesting things he mentioned, but one of them was the UK, which for the last 2 or 3 decades has been a service industry. So working with banking, consultancy, insurance, and that was where a lot of the UK economy was based. And the conversation was about moving away from that into a science, technology, engineering industry. And one of the things that the UK's done very well is very good at doing the high-end science and engineering, not so good at the manufacturing. Cost of living and things like that mean it's not so competitive. But the UK is certainly moving towards it. And actually, if you look at the evolution of quantum, just since I've been in there since 2014, the UK was one of the first that really backed quantum technologies. It put in place the quantum computing hub, the sensing hub. There was NKITs, lots of different programs to really promote quantum and push that agenda within the UK. Canada and Australia were also early adopters. Then you had the US and China came along a few years later. If you look at the Holland was another one that was early. Then more recently, in the last couple of years, you've seen Germany and France all of a sudden have thrown a lot of money at it. But if you look at it, the earlier you look to implement this, the more value you get from the investments you make in is often the case. So the UK wants to position itself right at the front for a lot of quantum technologies. And I think it's not alone in doing a good job, but it's doing a really good job of that. And there's lots of other countries that are doing the same. And I suspect, and this is just my opinion, so it doesn't necessarily carry a great deal of weight, but I think what we will see is over the years, certain locations will be associated with certain areas of quantum technologies. Certain countries or cities will be good at certain areas. So if you take the laser photonics arena, Munich and the areas around there has been traditionally very good. If you look at AI data, the US and China are ahead of the game on that. And I think we'll probably see this settling down to a certain extent in quantum. But at the moment, that quantum is quite decentralized. It's not based around certain locations, and that's really exciting. And actually, it may be that as quantum computing specifically has been born into the cloud era, it may be that centralizing doesn't happen because people can access the technologies from where they sit. And there are challenges around that. Some people, for example, as I understand it, in the Philippines, there's a bit of a challenge around the number of people with laptops. So people are having to do work on phones and things like that. So that may be one area that will need some adjustment to get the most out of it. There's also projects to translate different quantum texts into different languages to make it accessible. And these are also things that are happening within the UK as well, to try and create that global approach. That whilst the UK wants to be at the forefront of it, it's not a case of doing that alone. It's a case of doing that in conjunction with the global community.
Thank you, John. Are you okay for 2 more questions?
Yeah, of course. Yeah, more the merrier.
Okay. So this coming from Burns. Is there something quantum agriculture coined by the Americans?
So is there quantum agriculture?
Yeah, quantum agriculture.
So I'm not sure specifically by the Americans. I suspect there's going to be an interest in that, because if you take farming, there's a lot of data points that can be used. It could be looked at as being quite similar to traffic flow and things like that. But there's a lot of potential data points. So there's real, I think, real benefit with that. There's an organization called AI Bolt. So it's AI.boltz. That are doing some good work on this. So I think agriculture, with a number of data points on both in terms of the farm itself, but also the supply chain, I think this is something that can be a lot more efficient. And particularly with some of the other farming techniques, whether it's hydroponics or all of these other developments we're seeing in agriculture, I think that could be really valuable. And actually, if that leads to not just the increase in production and getting food to where it's needed, but also I think probably what's even more important but less focused on is the amount of land and resource that farming takes up. So if the land that's being used for farming can be condensed and more efficient, that can be given back to forests or jungles or whatever the natural ecosystem was. And that's one thing we're really short of at the moment is that the functions of nature. We're putting too much demand on these resources. So if we can reduce what we require in terms of space and resources, and give that back to nature, rather than just building more cities and skyscrapers, put it back to something that's fundamental, that we actually need more than we do the human conurbations, that could have really, really powerful repercussions that actually may be existential for humankind.
Yeah, there's a follow-up question from Burns. He was asking about the website that you just quoted. What is that?
Yes, it's Boltz AI. So BOLTZ.ai. I think I said it the wrong way around before. So yeah, BOLTZ.ai.
Okay.
Yeah, sorry, I think I got that the wrong way around before.
Okay. So there's another question here. This is Pavan from India, currently doing masters in computational modeling and simulation in Germany. So I am from the mechanical domain, neither computer science nor physics. I'm working on a skill set, quantum computing, AI, data analytics, high performance computing. So question is, can I start as a software developer with beginner, or probably a beginner software developer?
Yes, I think these are all valuable skills that will be required. So, and one of the things to bear in mind is that a lot of the focus has been on the physics and fundamentals. But actually, if you look at the journey that organizations are going to need to take to become commercially viable and generate revenue from their products and services, there's going to need to be a huge focus on engineering challenges. And engineering challenges aren't, they could be hardware, software, or firmware and everything else in between. So and these sorts of skills I think are going to be really important. So I certainly think that there are requirements for these skills, and they're likely to grow as well. I think that's the interesting thing, is that these challenges of how an organization gets its products or services to its customers and generates revenue is going to be hugely important. And the things you mentioned, you could fit in, if you take the sort of the value chain from the fundamentals to the applied. There's probably a number of different parts of that roadmap that your skills would fit in. So yeah, I think certainly there's potentially lots of avenues for you, and actually coming back to what I mentioned at the start, that find out what's most of interest to you, and then work on it, on how you position yourself for that. I think that there's potentially interesting opportunities for you there with that background.
Okay. So Sai has a follow-up question. He said, I want to pursue my career intersection of quantum computing, machine learning, data analytics, and HPC. His question is, could you share a roadmap, or do you have a roadmap for that?
Yeah. Again, I'd probably need a little bit more information on that. Do you mean in terms of the career? I'm going to take that in terms of the career roadmap,
Yes, career
rather than the
roadmap.
development roadmap. So within that, again, I think the first thing, and I keep saying this, but it's because it's so important, I'd focus on what's of interest to you. So there isn't just one path that can be taken, and actually it's your aspirations, goals, and interests applied to your skills and experience. That's what really creates that roadmap. So it's not this is the roadmap everyone must follow. It's a personalized thing. So, but I think that within that, it could be that for some people the right route is to do a bachelor's, do a master's, do a PhD, and a postdoc, and another postdoc, and take a professorship. For others, it's getting straight into the industry. For some, it will be taking a business hybrid approach, and then gradually going more towards the business or towards the technology. I think to give you all of the different variables, we'd need a robust quantum computer, because, as I said before, we've got the messy biological system there.
Yeah.
So, but I think there are a number of different ways of implementing that. And I think one of the things that to sort of help get a personalized view. So I mentioned getting groups and joining networks and communities. So LinkedIn's one such great resource for this. But within those groups, you may see, if you join a group and you see someone who is 2, 3, 5, 10 years further down the career path that you wish to follow, reach out to them. Reach out to these people and say, look, I really admire what you've done. I'd love to hear more about it. And you can find out what they did well, what they thought went well, what they would change if they had their time again, and see what the magic was for them to get into that position. And you've then got someone who's actually done it telling you that. Alongside that, you may actually have some other unlooked for advantages. So, and this is kind of a little bit of a coaching on things you can be doing to help your own career. By reaching out to these people, you're getting the inside track in terms of what they've learned on their journey. But alongside that, you're connecting with your peers. These are the people that might be the hiring managers that hire you. So first of all, you don't feel you're kind of feeling less in awe of these people that are in their ivory tower and still feel like demigods, because you're engaging with them and they just become a normal person. So when you are interviewing with their peers, you're going to feel more relaxed around that. You're going to be used to communicating with these people. It may be that they're looking to hire someone just like you in 6 months' time, and they bring that forward to interview you. You're demonstrating other skills. You're demonstrating that that you're able to think outside the box and not just you're able to network. You're inventive. It may be that this is a person that in 3 years' time is a hiring manager, and you've built up a relationship over the last 3 years. They go straight to you and don't need to advertise the role. All of these little things, and they're all incremental. None of this is a magic quant solution. If you do this, you'll definitely get this result. But these little things, they're incremental. And if you apply these things, it's good for your learning curve, your networking, and putting you and making you aware of what's happening, but also making other people aware of you as well. And you're showing that drive and desire to be in quantum. And that's for some people, that's really important. For some of the roles we get, people don't necessarily need quantum skills, because that can be developed. But having an interest in quantum, having been part of groups, having looked at personal projects and things like that, that demonstrates you as having the mentality and mindset and ethos that for some people is almost more important than skills. So that networking aspect to it's really crucial, and you can never start too soon. It doesn't matter if you haven't done that already. Start today, start tomorrow, because you can never start too soon. And once you're doing that, this is skills and experience, and it's miles in the tank. Once you've done it, you've got that. It doesn't go away. You can only add to it.
Thank you very much for that, John. That's a very nice advice. So I think that was all the questions. Do you have anything else you want to add?
No, I think I'd just come back to one of the things I mentioned and really stress that if you want to get involved in quantum, get involved in quantum, because by being in and around the ecosystem, that's where you're really going to get that exposure and understanding. And quantum, so the quantum ecosystem itself, in terms of people, is relatively small. I mean, it's growing rapidly, really rapidly, but it's still quite a small community. So in terms of experts, it's a very small community. There's lots of enthusiasts and interested people, and it's growing quickly. But there's lots of events and opportunities and organizations to interact with the community. And one of the things that it took me a while actually to really understand is that in quantum, there's a lot of people that are doing things for what they see as the greater good. And when someone says, "How can I help you?" most of the time they genuinely mean it. It took me a while to realize that they weren't after something from me, because that's what happens in the wider world. But by engaging with the community, there's a lot of people that want to help you, want to give you advice and assistance, and it's not transactional. People aren't necessarily looking to get something from you in return, because for those of us that have been in the ecosystem for a long time, we appreciate that if the ecosystem's healthy, everything we do is far more valuable, and that's from all of the different facets of what's valuable. It's not all about money and things like that. There's far bigger things at play, and people that are in the ecosystem, a lot of people realize that and really genuinely want to help.
Thank you, John, for that. So so I'd like to thank everyone for attending our very first major event this year.